A gavel cracked the silence like thunder in a storm that never ends. Judge Raymond Cole sat high above the courtroom, his black robe swallowing him in authority. He didn't just preside, he performed. Each strike of that gavel was theater, each sentence a declaration of power. To the cameras flashing from the press row, he was Brighton City's face of law and order. To the rows of weary families watching their sons and brothers disappear, he was something else entirely, a man who played God and called it justice. Every Tuesday morning, he delivered his favorite sermon. In my courtroom, there is no mercy for poisoners of our streets. He always said it with a sneer, the same rehearsed rhythm that made the evening news. And the man standing before him today, a quiet, handcuffed black man in a gray t-shirt, fit his script perfectly. Darius King, the file said. 2 ounces of cocaine, no priors, no chance. Cole looked at him and saw a statistic. What he didn't see was the trap closing around him, because Darius King wasn't a dealer. He wasn't even Darius King. Behind the calm eyes and the slumped shoulders stood Agent Noah Carter, a top investigator with the Internal Bureau of Justice, a man who had built entire operations to dismantle corruption. He'd gone undercover before, but never this deep, never this personal. This mission was different. Brighton was rotting from the top down, and Cole's courtroom was the wound that never healed. The city sparkled on the surface. Billboards of progress, ribbon cuttings, and campaign smiles. But underneath, money changed hands like confession slips. Developers got richer. Poor neighborhoods vanished. And Judge Cole signed every order that kept the machine running. For months, Noah mapped the pattern. Every conviction, every technicality, every mysteriously vanished witness. All roads led back to Cole. But paper trails weren't enough. The Bureau needed proof inside the system. Proof that could only come from someone the judge would never suspect. So Noah disappeared. He became Darius King, a man with no past, no privilege, and no protection. 6 weeks of living invisible. A beard he didn't recognize. Jobs that paid in cash and bruises. A single apartment light flickering over a mattress that stank of mold and survival. He watched Brighton's underbelly in motion. The cops who shook down kids. The lawyers who brokered freedom like stock. The court that manufactured guilt on demand. He learned how easily justice could be sold. One ruling, one lie, one signature at a time. And now, standing in chains before Judge Cole, he was about to prove it. Cole's gavel hit the block again. Bail denied. You belong in a cage. The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked. But Noah's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because the next sound that gavel made would echo all the way to the Bureau's war room. To understand how Noah became Darius, how the system trapped itself trying to trap him, you'll have to go back to where the plan began. That's where the story truly starts. Like, share, and subscribe to Speak Black for more gripping stories of justice, power, and redemption, where the truth always finds its voice. The echo of the gavel was a physical thing. It didn't fade so much as it settled. A fine dust of finality coating the air in Judge Raymond Cole's courtroom. The sound clung to the high, dark-paneled halls and pressed down on the spectators in their hard wooden pews. This was a place where hope came to die quietly, and the gavel was its funeral dirge. Brighton City sparkled just beyond the leaded glass windows. a postcard of gleaming skyscrapers and bustling progress. But in here, the air was stale with sweat, cheap perfume, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. This was the city's rotten core, the chamber where the beautiful lie was stripped away to reveal the ugly, grinding truth. The courtroom wasn't a hall of justice. It was a factory, and its product was human ruin. And Judge Cole was its master foreman. He moved with a languid, untouchable authority, his black robes flowing around him like a storm cloud. To the press, he was a headline. Tough-on-crime judge, cleans up the streets. To the detectives and lawyers who navigated his whims, he was a dangerous variable. But to the families, mostly poor, mostly black and brown, whose lives were dismantled with a few bored words from his bench, he was a god who had chosen wrath. His entrance was always a performance. The sharp rap of the gavel, the slow, deliberate scan of the room, ensuring every soul felt the weight of his gaze. He didn't just preside, he consumed. The people versus Darius King, the bailiff's voice boomed, a practiced prelude to the main event. The man who stood and shuffled forward, his ankles and wrists chained, seemed to shrink under the oppressive glare of the overhead lights. Darius King. The name was a ghost, a whisper of paperwork created in a sterile bureau office miles away. In reality, he was Agent Noah Carter, and every instinct in his body screamed against the shackles, against the powerlessness, against the performance of submission. He kept his eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat he'd practiced for weeks in the cracked mirror of his undercover apartment. But behind the facade, his mind was a camera, cold and precise, recording everything. 2 ounces of cocaine, Cole announced, his voice a low rumble of disdain as he glanced at the file before him. He didn't look at Noah, not really. He looked at the idea of him. A poisoner, a blight. Noah said nothing. He let the words wash over him, dissecting them. Poisoner, blight. Racially coded, dehumanizing. Perfect for the evening news clips. Cole finally lifted his eyes, a cold, blue stare that swept over Noah, as if he were something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Look at him," Cole said. Not to Noah, but to the room, to the cameras. Standing there in sullen silence. No remorse. This is the face of the epidemic we're fighting. A flash went off from the press row, capturing the image, the powerful, robed white judge, and the silent, shackled black man. The narrative was being written in real time, and Cole was its proud author. "Keep talking, Your Honor," Noah thought, the words a silent, sharp blade in the privacy of his mind. "Give me more. Show them who you really are." For months, Noah had mapped the corruption that bled from this very room. He'd seen the documents, the financial trails, the witnesses who mysteriously recanted or disappeared. Brighton's shiny exterior was built on a foundation of backroom deals and legalized theft. Developers got rich, poor neighborhoods were erased, and Judge Raymond Cole was the linchpin, signing the orders that made it all look legitimate. He was untouchable, shielded by his robe and his reputation. But the Bureau needed proof from inside the system. They needed someone Cole would never see coming. So Noah Carter had to disappear. He'd grown a beard, let his hair get wild. He'd become Darius King, a man with no history, no connections, no protection. He'd lived in a single room where the light bulb flickered over a stained mattress, taking cash-in-hand jobs that left his hands raw and his spirit weary. He'd watched the city's underbelly in motion, the cops on the take, the public defenders who advised a plea deal no matter the truth, the whole greasy machine that fed men like him to a man like Cole. And now, he was here. The bait and the trap, all in one. Cole leaned forward, his voice dropping into a confidential, venomous tone meant only for Noah, yet perfectly audible to the front rows. You think your silence is a shield? In my courtroom, it's an admission of guilt. You think you're a victim of this city? You are this city's sickness. Another flash, a muffled sob from somewhere in the gallery. Noah felt the heat of 100 eyes on him. Pity, anger, judgment. He focused on the grain of the wooden bench in front of him, on the cool metal of the cuffs around his wrists. He was a rock in a river of injustice, letting it flow around him. You have no idea. Noah's internal monologue continued, a calm counterpoint to the judge's fury. You see a statistic. I'm a mirror, and you're about to see your own reflection. The charade of a hearing continued. A weary public defender mumbled something about no prior arrests, about community ties. Cole cut him off with a wave of his hand. This man is a predator, Cole declared, his voice rising again to its theatrical pitch. He peddles despair in our neighborhoods. He preys on the weak. He does not deserve to walk the streets. He seeks to destroy. The performance was reaching its crescendo. Noah could feel it. This was Cole's Tuesday morning sermon, and he was the central prop. Cole's eyes locked onto Noah's one last time, a final, futile attempt to intimidate, to break the calm he mistook for stupor. He saw nothing but a vacant stare. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. With a flourish, he raised the gavel high. The courtroom held its breath. The only sound was the frantic clicking of cameras, capturing the moment of condemnation. The gavel fell. Crack. Bail denied, Judge Cole pronounced, his voice flat and final. You belong in a cage. The crowd erupted in a wave of gasps and murmured protests. The gavel's fury was complete. But as the bailiff stepped forward to take his arm, Noah's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. He had let the system show its true, brutal face. He had taken its best shot. And the next sound that gavel made, he knew, would echo all the way to the Bureau's war room. The first, satisfying crack in Judge Raymond Cole's perfect, corrupt world. The war room was a temple of order, a world away from the chaotic, perfumed sweat of Cole's courtroom. Here, the air was cool and recycled, humming with the quiet power of servers and silent resolve. Wall-sized screens glowed with flow charts, financial records, and a web of interconnected faces. The beautiful, ugly face of Brighton's corruption. This was Noah Carter's natural habitat. 3 days before he became Darius King, he stood before the central screen, laser pointer in hand, his posture straight, his voice a calm, analytical instrument. He wore a crisp, white shirt, the sleeves rolled precisely to his elbows. This was the real Noah. Sharp, principled, a man who believed in patterns because patterns could be understood, dismantled, and brought to justice. It's not a bribe, he said, the red dot of his pointer circling a face that smiled from a Society magazine cover. Judge Raymond Cole. It's an investment. And the return is the city itself. The only other person in the room, Director Irene Thorne, watched him from the head of the polished table. Her steely gray hair was cut in a no-nonsense bob, and her eyes missed nothing. She was the one who had pulled Noah from the Financial Crimes Division, who had seen in him not just a brilliant investigator, but a man who could hold a line when others would bend. "Walk me through the return, Noah," she said, her voice low and gravelly from 30 years of chain-smoking and bureaucratic wars. "The return is real estate," Noah explained, clicking to a map of Brighton. Dozens of properties lit up in red. The North Bridge development, a billion-dollar urban renewal project. But to clear the land, you need to clear the people. You need to destabilize the neighborhoods, drive out the working class, mostly minority residents. Another click. Police reports, arrest records. That's where the Blue Hand unit comes in. A dedicated, dirty squad. They target the right blocks, make the right arrests. They bring the cases here. The laser dot landed back on Cole's face. And Judge Cole ensures the right outcomes. Bail denied. Maximum sentences. Plea deals coerced through overcharging. Families are torn apart. Tenants are evicted. And the properties go into receivership. A third click. A law firm's logo appeared. Shaw and Valance, the receiver of choice. They sell the properties at a fraction of their value to shell corporations. Final click. The shell corporations dissolved, revealing their true owner, a conglomerate called Omni Properties Development. Omni's major investors include city council members, police commissioners, and half the old money families in Brighton. Noah finished, letting the pointer drop. Cole isn't just on the take. He's a shareholder. He's using his gavel to gentrify the city, one destroyed life at a time. The room was silent, save for the hum of the machines. The scale of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just crime. It was a hostile takeover of justice itself. "We have the paper trail," Director Thorne said, steepling her fingers. "We have the financials. What we don't have is a witness. We don't have the smell of it. We need someone who can get inside the machine, who can hear Cole give the order, who can get a cop to admit they're planting evidence on a specific street for a specific payoff. We need someone he would never suspect." Noah's eyes scanned the web of conspiracy on the screen. He saw the faces of the people he'd studied for months, the smug lawyers, the brutal cops, the smiling judge. And then he saw the other faces, the ones not on the screen, the ones from the case files. Maria Flores, a single mother who lost her home and her son after a bogus drug charge. Old Mr. Henderson, evicted from the building his family had owned for 50 years after his grandson was arrested on a weapons charge that miraculously vanished from the record after the property changed hands. He remembered their eyes in the photographs, the confusion, the betrayal. They hadn't just been robbed. They had been told it was justice. The system built to protect them had been weaponized against them. He turned from the screen and looked at Thorne, his decision already made, solidifying in his gut like cold iron. "So, we give him someone he wouldn't suspect," Noah said, his voice quiet but absolute. "He sees the world in types, in statistics. He needs a statistic." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "What are you proposing, Carter?" "I'm proposing you send in your best analyst." He met her gaze without flinching. "Send me." "Noah, he'll never see it coming, Irene." Noah pressed, the use of her first name underscoring the gravity. He looks at a young black man in a gray t-shirt, and he sees a predator. A blight. He doesn't see a federal agent with a master's in criminology. His arrogance is his blind spot. I can be that blind spot. The transformation began that night. It was more than a disguise. It was an erasure. First, the clothes. The tailored shirts and polished shoes were boxed away, replaced with worn jeans, a generic gray t-shirt, and a second-hand hoodie that smelled faintly of cigarettes and someone else's life. He stood in front of a mirror, running his hands over the coarse fabric, feeling the first layer of Noah Carter slough away. Then, the body. He stopped his daily workouts, allowing the defined muscle to soften, to take on the leaner, harder look of a man who worked for his meals, not one who curated them in a gym. He grew a beard, not the stylish stubble he was used to, but a ragged, untamed thing that itched constantly. He let his hair grow out, its natural curl becoming unruly. The speech came next. He spent hours with a dialect coach, sanding down the precise, educated cadence of his speech, replacing it with the flattened vowels and economical grammar of the streets. Yeah, instead of yes. Nah, instead of no. He practiced a slower, more deliberate way of moving, a physical language of lowered expectations. The Bureau's forgers built Darius King from nothing, a birth certificate from a state with poor digital records, a social security number that led to a dead end. They gave him a history of cash jobs, evictions, a quiet, invisible life. He memorized it all until the lies felt more real than his own past. In the quiet moments, in the sterile safe house, the weight of it pressed down on him. He was volunteering to walk into a cage. He was giving up his name, his identity, his freedom. One mistake, one flicker of recognition in his eyes, and he would disappear. He would become Darius King in truth, just another black man swallowed by a system he had sworn to protect. He thought of Maria Flores's son, sitting in a cell because his existence was inconvenient to a developer's profit margin. He thought of the gavel falling, over and over, a metronome of corruption. This was the only way to break the rhythm. The final step was the apartment, a single room in a building scheduled for demolition. Its windows looking out onto the alley, Cole's rulings were helping to empty. The light bulb flickered over a stained mattress. The air stank of mold and despair. This was his new home. This was the world Judge Cole had built. Standing in that room, Noah Carter took a last, deep breath. He let go of the man he was, the analyst, the strategist, the man with a name and a future. He let the silence of the room, the weight of the injustice, and the face of Raymond Cole fill the space he left behind. When he opened his eyes, he looked in the cracked mirror on the wall. A stranger stared back, shoulders slumped, eyes guarded, dressed in the uniform of the powerless. Noah Carter was gone. The world of Darius King was a world of shadows and survival. The Crestview apartments weren't a home. They were a waiting room for eviction, a 3-story monument to neglect. Paint peeled from the walls in long, sad curls, and the hallway air was a thick cocktail of mildew, stale grease, and hopelessness. Noah's single room was his anchor in this new, grim reality. The flickering light over the mattress was his sun and moon. This was the front line of Judge Cole's war. The urban renewal wasn't an abstract concept here. It was the constant, low-grade terror of a knock on the door. It was the sight of a family's belongings piled on the curb. It was the silence that fell when a patrol car, a specific black and white with the number 187 stenciled on the bumper, cruised slowly down the street. He learned the rhythms quickly. The cops, Officers Lang and Rourke, were the neighborhood's recurring nightmare. Lang was the talker, lean with a predator's smile that never reached his cold, empty eyes. Rourke was the muscle, a wall of a man who communicated with grunts and the casual, threatening weight of his presence. Noah, as Darius, kept his head down. He took cash jobs moving scrap metal, the work leaving his hands grimy and his back aching. He shopped at the corner store with his head slightly bowed, his speech a soft mumble. He was perfecting the art of being invisible. But he watched. He saw Lang and Rourke shake down a teenager for the contents of his wallet, calling it a street tax. He saw them drag a crying woman from her apartment for disturbing the peace when she dared to complain about a broken lock. He saw the way the residents looked at them, not with anger, but with a weary, bone-deep resignation. This was the system. This was the machine Cole oversaw, and these two were its grinning, brutal enforcers. He built quiet rapport. He helped old Mr. Gable carry his groceries up the crumbling stairs. He gave a silent nod to Miss Anya, who sat on her stoop every evening, watching the street with the tired eyes of a historian recording its decline. He said little, but his presence, quiet, unthreatening, sharing in their hardship, was a language they understood. He was one of them, a ghost in the system. He knew he was a target. A new face was always a target. But he needed to be the right kind of target. He needed to fit Cole's profile perfectly. The setup came on a Tuesday, the air thick with the promise of rain. It was poetic in a cruel way, Cole's favorite day for his courtroom sermons. Noah was walking back from the scrapyard, the grit of the day ground deep into his skin, his body humming with a tiredness that was more than physical. The black and white Unit 187 was parked at the mouth of his alley, idling like a panther. It was Lang who got out, his smile a slash of white in the gathering dusk. "Darius King," he said, the name a mockery on his lips. "Heard you're the new guy, getting settled in?" Noah stopped, allowing his posture to slump further into submission. "Just trying to get by, officer." Rourke emerged from the passenger side, his bulk blocking the alley's exit. "Everybody's trying to get by. Some of us do it by following the law. Others—" He let the implication hang in the foul air. "I ain't done nothing," Noah mumbled, layering a tremor into his voice. It wasn't hard. The adrenaline was real, a cold spike in his veins. "See, that's what they all say." Lang sighed, stepping closer. He did a slow, theatrical circle around Noah. "Wrong place, Darius. This whole neighborhood is the wrong place." He stopped in front of him. "Wrong skin, too, makes my job easy." The racism was as casual as a shrug, a tool they used without thought. "Empty your pockets," Rourke grunted. Noah complied slowly, pulling out a worn leather wallet containing $43 and a fake ID and a set of keys. He held his hands out, palms open. Lang patted him down, his hands rough and efficient. He slapped Noah's pockets, felt the lining of his hoodie. Then, his hands stilled. He made a soft, tutting sound, a false note of disappointment. "What's this now?" Lang's voice was a low purr. From the depths of the hoodie's front pocket, a pocket Noah knew was empty, Lang's hand emerged. Pinched between his gloved fingers were two small, clear plastic bags filled with a white, rocky substance. Crack cocaine. 2 ounces. The exact amount from his file. The world seemed to slow down. Noah's training screamed at him to note every detail. The practiced grace of the plant, the way Rourke shifted to block the view from the street, the absolute certainty in their faces. This was a routine, a well-rehearsed play, and he was the starring actor. "Looks like you're more than just a scrap man, Darius," Lang said, holding the bags up to the dim light. You're a poisoner, a blight, just like the judge says. That ain't mine, Noah said, putting a desperate, pleading edge into his voice. The performance was vital, even now, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. They never are, Rourke said, his voice flat. The shift was instantaneous. The false civility vanished. On the ground, Lang barked, his voice cracking through the alley like a gunshot. Now, hands behind your back. Noah moved to comply, but Rourke was already on him. A heavy boot swept his legs out from under him. He hit the cracked asphalt hard, the impact jarring his teeth. A knee drove into his spine, forcing the air from his lungs. The cold, hard click of the cuffs around his wrists was a final, definitive sound. He was dragged to his feet, his arms screaming in their sockets. Lang shoved the plastic bags in his face. You're going away for a long time, King. As they manhandled him into the back of the squad car, the cage door slamming shut with a sound of absolute finality, Noah let his head fall back against the stained vinyl seat. He allowed the mask of Darius to show the raw fear they expected. The wide eyes, the shallow, panicked breaths. But inside, behind the eyes of Agent Noah Carter, a cold, hard satisfaction settled. It worked. The system had taken the bait. He had witnessed the corruption from the inside, felt its hands on him. He had the proof of the plant, the violent arrest, the racist taunts. It was all going on the record. This was the first tangible link in the chain that would lead back to Cole. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the Crestview behind. Through the reinforced window, he saw Ms. Anya on her stoop, her hand over her mouth. He saw Mr. Gable shaking his head in weary defeat. They thought they had broken another one. They thought they had won. As the sirens began to wail, a different thought, cold and sharp, cut through the triumph. It worked. Maybe too well. He was no longer an observer. He was in the machine, and now he had to survive the gears. Was ready. The Brighton City Central Detention Center wasn't a place. It was a process. A machine designed to strip away layers of humanity, one degrading step at a time. For Noah Carter, it was the ultimate field research. For Darius King, it was just Tuesday. It began with the booking desk, a scarred laminate counter stained with the fingerprints of the damned. A corrections officer with bored, bloodshot eyes processed him without looking up, his questions a monotonous drone. Name, date of birth. The answers, Darius King, March 15th, felt less like lies and more like incantations, spells that were binding him deeper into this fiction. Then came the fingerprints. The ink was cold and thick, pushed and rolled against his skin by an officer who handled his hands like raw meat. Each print was a brand, a permanent mark in the system he was trying to expose. Next, the camera flash, blinding him for a second, capturing the hollow-eyed, bearded face of a man he barely recognized. The final stage was the strip search. Arms up, turn around, bend over, cough. The commands were delivered in the same flat tone used to inventory office supplies. Noah stood naked under the harsh fluorescent lights of a cold, tiled room. His clothes a discarded heap on the floor. He felt the eyes of two guards on him, not with malice, but with a profound, soul-crushing indifference. This was the point of the exercise. It wasn't about finding contraband. It was about demonstrating, in the most visceral way possible, who had the power and who had nothing. Not even the dignity of their own skin. He complied, his mind detaching, observing the procedure as if from a great height. Note the procedural dehumanization, standard for all inmates, yet disproportionately applied to minorities, a psychological priming for compliance. The clinical analysis was the only shield he had against the raw humiliation. They issued him a set of orange scrubs, the coarse fabric scratching against his skin, and rubber sandals that slapped against the floor. Then, they marched him into the tank. The holding cell was a cacophony of despair. The air was a solid thing, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, industrial disinfectant, and a sour undercurrent of fear. Men sat on hard benches or paced the limited floor, their faces a gallery of fractured lives, rage, resignation, vacant stares. He found a space on a bench near the wall and lowered himself into it, adopting Darius's slumped posture. He didn't have to ask for stories. The cell offered them up like confessions. A young Latino kid, no more than 19, whispered to the wall, "They just came in. Said I matched a description. I was just walking to my cousin's." His hands wouldn't stop shaking. An older black man with a weary map of lines on his face sighed. "Public defender saw me for 2 minutes. Said the DA's offer is 2 years. Told me to take it. 2 years for a wallet that wasn't even mine." He looked at Noah, his eyes pools of exhausted wisdom. "You knew? First time?" Noah gave a slow, single nod, a grim smile. "You'll learn. In here, you're guilty. The trial, that's just the paperwork." Noah listened, his silence a sponge. He heard the same refrains, the same patterns. Wrong place, wrong skin. Overworked lawyers. Pressure to plead. The machine wasn't just corrupt at the top with coal. It was rusted through at every joint, grinding down the most vulnerable because it was the path of least resistance. He was transferred to a crowded general population block. The noise was constant. Shouts, the clang of steel doors, the blare of a static-ridden TV. He kept to himself, but his quiet demeanor and lack of gang affiliation made him an anomaly. A large, heavily tattooed man named Marcus, in for an alleged parole violation, eventually sidled up to him in the yard. "You ain't from around here," Marcus stated, his voice a low rumble. "Just trying to get by," Noah repeated at his mantra. Marcus grunted. "Ain't we all?" He looked out at the concrete yard, a cage under a sliver of sky. "Seen you watching the COs. Smart. You see that one?" He gave a subtle nod towards a guard leaning against a wall. "Favors for favors. You got someone on the outside who can put money on your books. You can get comforts. You got nothing? You get nothing." Noah had already seen it. The subtle exchange of a candy bar for a note. The guard who looked the other way during a minor infraction for an inmate who knew how to behave. It was a shadow economy, a microcosm of the corruption outside. Everything was for sale, even a moment of peace. His public defender arrived 2 days later. Her name was Chloe Abrams, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She carried a stack of files that threatened to spill from her arms, and her blazer was wrinkled. In a small, airless conference room, she slapped his file on the table. "Darius King, 2 ounces, no priors." She didn't look hopeful. She looked like she was reading a eulogy. "The DA's offering 5 years. With good behavior, you're out in 3.5. Noah kept his eyes down. The drugs weren't mine. They were planted. She let out a short, tired breath. It was a sound she'd made 1,000 times. "Okay." And the officers are going to say they found them in your pocket during a lawful stop. Who do you think a jury will believe? Officers Lang and Rourke. Unit 187, Noah said, his voice low. They've done this before. Something flickered in her eyes. Not belief, but a spark of professional curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, studying him. You're very calm for a man looking at 5 years. Most people are crying, begging, or raging by now. Noah met her gaze for a fraction of a second, then looked away as if ashamed. Crying don't change nothing. She was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen on the file. No, it doesn't. She gathered her papers. I'll file the standard motions. But, Darius, don't get your hopes up. This is a fast-track case. Fast-track? Expedited. Judge Cole's orders. He's pushing all the Northbridge-related arrests through quickly. She said it as a matter of fact, but then she paused, her brow furrowing. It was a tiny crack in her professional exhaustion. Usually it's for people with long sheets, not first-time, low-level possession. She shook her head, dismissing her own thought. I'll be in touch. After she left, Noah sat perfectly still in the silent room. The pieces were snapping into place with terrifying precision. Expedited. Cole wasn't just overseeing the system. He was micromanaging it, ensuring his statistics were processed and warehoused with maximum efficiency. He was cleaning up the chessboard. He was back in his cell, the din of the block a dull roar in his ears, when the cold realization settled in his gut. He was inside the machine now, a single cog in a vast, brutal engine of injustice. He had the evidence, he had the patterns, he had the connection. But from in here, surrounded by the human wreckage of Cole's ambition, the victory felt distant and abstract. The only thing that felt real was the cold of the concrete floor and the stark, painful truth in the eyes of the men around him. He was one of them. And if his plan failed, he would disappear. Just another name on a docket, another life processed and discarded by the machine. The courtroom felt smaller this time, the air tighter, as if the walls were slowly contracting. For Noah, sitting at the defense table, it was no longer a stage but a dissection table, and he was the specimen pinned under the bright, unforgiving lights of justice's cruel parody. The dance, be it with the jury selection, a misnomer for a process more akin to casting a play where the director already knew the ending. The prosecutor, a sleek man named Albright with a voice like polished marble, dismissed potential jurors with polite, deadly efficiency. Anyone who expressed skepticism about police testimony, anyone who lived in a renewal zone, anyone with a hint of empathy in their eyes, they were all gracefully excused. Chloe Abrams, his public defender, tried to fight. Your Honor, the prosecution is systematically excluding jurors from demographic backgrounds similar to the defendants. Judge Cole peered down from the bench, his expression one of mild, academic boredom. Ms. Abrams, Mr. Albright has provided race-neutral reasons for each strike. The court is satisfied. Let's proceed. The resulting panel was a sea of blank, compliant faces. They looked like people who had never had a bad day, who believed authority was always right because it had never been wrong to them. They were perfect. The trial itself was a rehearsed symphony of injustice. Officer Lang took the stand, his uniform crisp, his demeanor oozing a confident, wounded righteousness. He narrated the events with the smooth cadence of a fairy tale. The suspicious subject, the lawful stop, the plain sight discovery of the drugs. He was a blight, Your Honor, Lang said, glancing at the jury. We were just cleaning up the streets. Noah watched, his face a mask of passive fear, while inside, his mind was a steel trap. Note the use of the judge's own language, coordinated messaging, reinforcing the narrative. When Chloe rose for cross-examination, the room's atmosphere shifted from a lecture to a duel. Officer Lang, is it standard procedure to immediately locate narcotics in a specific, empty pocket without a more thorough search? Objection. Argumentative, Albright said, barely standing. Sustained, Cole chimed in instantly. Officer, you stated you were in the area on a routine patrol, yet your activity logs for that day show you were dispatched to 3 other calls across the district. How do you explain your presence in that specific alley at that specific time? Lang's eyes flickered, just for a microsecond, towards the bench. We decided to conduct a proactive patrol in a high-crime area after clearing our last call. Without logging it? Objection. Relevance? Albright snapped. Sustained. Move on, counselor, Cole said, a note of warning in his voice. It was like trying to punch through a brick wall. Every question Chloe asked that approached the truth was met with an objection, and every objection was sustained by Cole. The judge and prosecutor moved in a seamless, synchronized rhythm, a machine designed to grind down any hint of dissent. Noah's eyes, perpetually downcast, missed nothing. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible nod Cole gave to the court clerk after one of Chloe's more pointed questions was shut down. He saw the way Albright would adjust his tie, a signal that seemed to calm Lang when he grew flustered. This wasn't just a trial, it was a choreographed performance, and he was the sacrificial lamb. In the stifling silence of the courtroom, his mind flashed to a cool, dark room miles away. The Bureau's war room. Director Thorne stood before a live feed of the trial, her arms crossed. An analyst whispered, "We've got the clerk's nod. Logged. Albright's tie adjustment. Logged. The jury foreman is a second cousin to a project manager at Omni Properties. It's all here, Irene. It's all on the record." Thorne didn't smile. The record doesn't matter if we can't get him out. Keep watching. The emotional gut punch came in the form of a witness named Leo, a gaunt, twitchy man from the Crestview, who took the stand and swore under oath that he'd seen Darius selling drugs in the alley days before his arrest. "I seen him clear as day," Leo said, his voice trembling with a false conviction that broke Noah's heart. He couldn't look at Chloe, couldn't look at the jury. He was staring at his own hands. A man selling his soul for what? A reduced sentence on his own charges? A threat against his family? Chloe stood up, her body trembling with a fury she couldn't voice. "Mr. Henderson, is it true you have 3 pending drug possession charges of your own? Charges that were mysteriously dropped by the DA's office yesterday?" Albright was on his feet. "Objection. Witness credibility is not on trial here." "It is now, Your Honor," Chloe shot back, her voice rising for the first time. Cole's gavel cracked, a sound of absolute finality. "The jury will disregard Ms. Abrams' last statement. The charges against this witness are irrelevant. The objection is sustained." Disregard. The word hung in the air, a testament to the entire farce. The truth was irrelevant. It was what the machine declared it to be. As Leo scurried from the stand, Noah felt a cold certainty settle over him. This was bigger than just him. This was a system that could bend reality itself, that could make honest people lie and liars into saints, all with the bang of a gavel. Albright stood, smoothing his suit jacket. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." The room fell into a thick, heavy silence. The state's case was a fortress of lies, half-truths, and corrupted procedure. The cops were heroes. The witness was credible. The evidence was incontrovertible. Chloe sank into her chair beside Noah, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She leaned over, her voice a hollow whisper. "I am sorry, Darius. I tried." Noah gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He could feel the eyes of the jury, already convinced. He could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from the prosecution's table. He could feel the weight of Cole's gaze from the bench, already moving on to the next case, the next statistic. The odds weren't just hopeless, they were engineered to be. He was trapped in the belly of the beast, and from the inside, the beast's heartbeat was the sound of a gavel, pounding in rhythm with his own doom. The defense's case was a ghost, a whisper trying to shout down a hurricane. Chloe Abrams called a single-character witness, Ms. Anya from the Crestview. The old woman, her hands knotted with arthritis and age, stood straight and spoke in a clear, defiant voice. "He was quiet, helped me with my groceries. Never saw him with no drugs. Never." But under Albright's cross-examination, her testimony was deftly twisted into nothing. "So you didn't see him every hour of every day, correct?" "Well, no, but so you cannot say with certainty what he did when you weren't watching." She was dismissed, her truth rendered a meaningless anecdote. Then, it was Noah's turn. He took the stand as Darius King, the performance of a lifetime distilled into its final, crucial act. He kept his voice soft, his answers simple. He described the stop, the plant, the violence. He was calm, too calm. Albright stalked before him, a predator sensing weakness. So, Officers Lang and Rourke, two decorated veterans, just decided to randomly target you, to fabricate evidence against a man with no criminal record for no reason at all? "Yes," Noah said, his gaze steady. "A convenient story, Mr. King. Isn't it true you're simply a drug dealer who got caught and are now lying to save yourself?" "No, sir." But his calmness read as coldness to the jury. His lack of tears, of sputtering rage, was interpreted as a lack of feeling. He wasn't the victim they expected. He was an enigma, and in a rigged game, an enigma is always guilty. Chloe's closing statement was a masterpiece of desperate passion, a final, furious swing at the fortress walls. She spoke of reasonable doubt, of corrupted procedures, of a system that had already tried and convicted Darius King in an alley. Her voice cracked with a sincerity that had been beaten out of her years ago, but which this case, this quiet, wronged man, had somehow rekindled. Albright's closing was a slick, polished recap of his fairy tale. He painted Darius as a poison, Lang and Rourke as heroes, and the verdict as the only possible conclusion for a civilized society. Judge Cole gave the jury their instructions, his voice a sonorous drone that seemed to subtly emphasize the prosecution's points. Then they filed out. The deliberation lasted 47 minutes. Noah sat beside Chloe at the defense table, the wood cool beneath his fingers. He could feel the vibrations of the city outside, the hum of a life moving on. He thought of the war room, of Thorne's face, a silent portrait on a screen. He thought of the months of work, the sacrifice, all funneling down to this single, still moment in a room that smelled of lemon polish and dread. When the jury filed back in, their faces were a unified blank slate. They didn't look at him. Not one of them. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" Cole asked, though he already knew. "We have, Your Honor." The paper passed to the clerk, then to the judge. Cole read it, his expression not changing by a single muscle. He passed it back. The clerk stood. "On the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, how does the jury find the defendant?" "Darius King?" The forewoman's voice was clear, crisp, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Guilty." The word was a physical blow. It sucked the air from the room. A collective gasp, then a surge of noise from the gallery was instantly silenced by Cole's gavel. Crack. Cameras exploded in a frenzy of light, capturing the fall of another statistic. They zoomed in on Noah's face, searching for the breakdown, the rage, the tears. They found nothing but a profound, unsettling stillness. Beside him, Chloe flinched as if she'd been shot. She turned to him, her eyes swimming in a pool of shame and fury. "I am so sorry, Darius," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I failed you. The whole damn system failed you." He gave her the slightest shake of his head. It wasn't her fault. She was a good person, trying to bail out the ocean with a thimble. But the thought was distant, academic. The verdict was a key turning in a lock deep inside him. This was the design. This was the machine working exactly as intended. To change it, to truly understand its corrosive power, he had first to feel its full, crushing weight. He had to be broken by it. The theory was now flesh, was pain, was the taste of ash in his mouth. Judge Cole allowed the moment to hang. Let the victory for the good guys settle in for the cameras. A faint, smug smirk touched the corner of his mouth. Another poisoner off the streets. Another brick laid in the foundation of his legacy. "We will proceed to sentencing immediately," he announced, his voice booming with righteous authority. He looked down at Noah, and for the first time he truly saw him, not as a man, but as a trophy. "Darius King," Cole began, picking up his gavel, not to strike, but to hold, to caress like a scepter. "You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. You represent a cancer that this city is determined to cut out. You have shown no remorse, only a belligerent disregard for the law and the hard-working officers who enforce it." He leaned forward, his eyes cold and pitiless, ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. The sentencing speech was his favorite soliloquy, the moment he truly felt like a god. The storm of the verdict had passed, leaving a dramatic, heartbreaking stillness. And in that stillness, Noah Carter, buried deep within Darius King, waited. The trap was set. The weight had been felt. Now, it was time for the machine to break itself. Judge Cole's lips parted, the first syllable of his cruel sentencing speech poised on his tongue, a word that would have been a nail in a coffin. But it never came. "Your Honor." The voice that cut through the heavy silence was not the soft, defeated mumble of Darius King. It was clear, calm. It carried a resonance of authority that didn't ask for permission, but demanded attention. It was a voice that belonged in a room exactly like this one, but on the other side of the bench. Cole froze, his gavel hovering in midair, his eyes, previously glazed with smug power, sharpened with annoyance. "Mr. King, you will remain silent." Your opportunity to speak has passed. My name, the man at the defense table said, slowly rising to his feet, his shackled hands resting calmly on the table, is not Darius King. The stillness in the courtroom became absolute. Cameras, which had begun to lower, snapped back up. Chloe Abrams stared at her client, her mouth slightly agape. The confusion was a living thing, thickening the air. Noah's posture had changed. The slump was gone, replaced by a straight-backed, square-shouldered stance that seemed to make him taller. The veil of submission had lifted from his eyes, revealing a cold, sharp intelligence that scanned the room with predatory focus. "Sit down," Cole commanded, a flicker of unease beneath his anger. "Bailiff, restrain the defendant." "I wouldn't do that," Noah said, his gaze locking with the bailiff's, freezing the man in his tracks. His cuffed hands moved with deliberate, unhurried purpose. He reached into the hidden, stitched-in compartment of the ill-fitting orange scrub pants, a compartment that had passed through a dozen strip searches. From it, he produced a small black leather wallet. The entire room leaned forward, a collective, silent gasp hanging in the balance. He flipped it open. A gold shield caught the overhead light, gleaming like a shard of the sun. Beside it, an identification card with his photograph, clean-shaven, sharp, and a name that sent a seismic shock through the foundations of the courtroom. "My name," he repeated, his voice now ringing with definitive, unassailable command, "is Special Agent Noah Carter, Internal Bureau of Justice." The silence shattered. Gasps, shouts, the frantic, explosive clicking of cameras. Reporters scrambled for their phones. In the gallery, people stood, pointing, their voices a rising wave of disbelief. Chloe Abrams stumbled back from the table as if struck, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a torrent of emotions: shock, dawning understanding, and a wild, fragile hope. Judge Cole's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The smug superiority melted into confusion, then hardened into a mask of pure, undiluted fury. "This is a trick, a desperate stunt. Bailiff, seize that fake identification." But the bailiff didn't move. He was staring at the main doors at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors burst open. A swarm of tactical agents in navy blue jackets emblazoned with IBJ flooded the room, moving with disciplined, swift purpose. Their entry was a thunderclap of finality. "Everyone remain calm. This is a federal operation," a voice boomed. Chaos erupted, but it was a controlled chaos. The federal agents knew their targets. 2 agents descended on Officers Lang and Rourke, who were halfway out of their seats, their faces pale with horror. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and deprivation of rights under color of law," an agent stated, pulling Lang's hands behind his back. The familiar cold click of cuffs that had once been on Noah's wrists now snapped around theirs. At the prosecution's table, Albright was frantically gathering his papers, a rabbit caught in headlights. An agent placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Albright, you are to be detained for questioning regarding your role in a conspiracy to obstruct justice." But the centerpiece, the climax of the entire operation, was the bench. Director Irene Thorne herself walked calmly through the pandemonium, her steely gaze fixed on the man in the black robe. She stopped before the bench, looking up at Judge Raymond Cole, who was now standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood of his podium, his body trembling with a volatile mix of rage and terror. "Raymond Cole," Thorne's voice cut through the din. cold and clear. By the authority vested in me, you are under arrest for racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, and treason against the justice you swore to uphold. For a breathtaking moment, Cole was a statue of fallen power. The robe that had been his mantle of authority was now just a shroud. His courtroom, his kingdom, had become his prison. Two agents moved around the bench. One of them, with a grim sense of poetic justice, held up a pair of handcuffs. "You can't do this," Cole spat, his voice a strangled whisper. "I am a judge." "Not anymore," Noah said, his voice carrying across the room. He had not moved from his spot, a still point in the storm. He watched as the agents guided Cole's hands, the hands that had signed away lives, that had banged the gavel of false justice, behind his back. The metallic click of the cuffs was softer than his gavel, but 1,000 times more powerful. It was the sound of the system turning on its abuser. The cameras, now unimpeded, captured every glorious, humiliating second. The mighty Judge Cole, being led in cuffs from his own courtroom, his head bowed, the world he built crashing down around him in a hail of flashbulbs and shouted questions. Chloe Abrams finally found her voice, turning to Noah, tears now streaming freely down her face. "All of it," she whispered. "The whole time." Noah gave her a small, solemn nod. "I needed to see it from the inside. I'm sorry for the deception." She shook her head, a laugh mixed with a sob escaping her. Don't you ever be sorry." The crowd was in an uproar, some cheering, some crying, all witnessing a moment of raw, cinematic justice they would never forget. The story wasn't about a drug dealer anymore. It was about a corruption so deep, it required a sacrifice this profound to unearth it. As the federal agents began to secure the room, one of them approached Noah with a key. He knelt and unlocked the shackles around his ankles, then the cuffs on his wrists. The heavy iron fell away, clattering to the floor. The final sound of Darius King. Noah Carter was free, and as he stood, rubbing the raw marks on his wrists, he looked at the empty judge's bench, at the stunned faces of the jury, at the broken machinery of a corrupt court now grinding to a permanent halt. The reckoning was complete. The arrest of Judge Raymond Cole wasn't an ending. It was a detonation. The shockwave radiated out from the courthouse, cracking the glossy facade of Brighton City wide open. The operation, code-named Project Blindfold, was now public, and its scalpel was cutting deep. While the news channels replayed the stunning courtroom footage on a loop, Cole's cuffed hands, Noah's badge gleaming, the real work began in a series of synchronized, brutal strikes. At the sleek, glass-walled offices of Shaw and Valance, attorneys were mid-billable hour when IBJ agents marched through the revolving doors. Computers were seized, hard drives pulled from servers, and the named partners were read their rights amid the stunned silence of their staff. The receivership of choice was being received by the federal government. Across town, the headquarters of Omni Properties Development was raided. Men in tailored suits who brokered deals over golf and single malt scotch found themselves pressed against their own mahogany desks, hands zip-tied. Blueprints for the Northbridge development were seized as evidence, not of progress, but of conspiracy. The most visceral raid was at the precinct housing the Blue Hand unit. Agents in tactical gear cleared out the entire squad room, boxing up files and hauling away the personal lockers of Lang, Rourke, and a dozen others. The unit's unofficial logo, a blue fist, was photographed by the press, taped to a locker, before the whole corrupt edifice was dismantled. The kingdom was collapsing, and its loyal soldiers were the first to betray it. Faced with the mountain of evidence Noah had gathered, the recorded patterns, the financial trails, and now the full weight of the federal government, the blue wall of silence crumbled to dust. Cops flipped. They confessed to the planted evidence, the coerced confessions, the proactive patrols that were nothing but targeted harassment paid for by Omni Properties. They gave up their superiors, their procedures, their secrets, each one trying to carve out a lesser sentence from the wreckage. The most damning evidence came from the numbers. IBJ forensic accountants, working through the night, traced the money. They followed the digital crumbs from Omni's accounts to a labyrinth of shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, and from there, directly into Raymond Cole's hidden investment portfolios. Millions of dollars, all signed into existence with his gavel. 2 days after the courthouse spectacle, Director Irene Thorne stood before a forest of microphones. Noah Carter, now clean-shaven and wearing a dark, well-fitted suit, stood beside her, a quiet, powerful presence. For too long, the people of Brighton were told that justice was the sound of a gavel, Thorne said, her voice steady and strong. But a sound is just noise. True justice isn't the loud, performative act. It's what happens in the silence that follows. It's the truth that echoes long after the show is over. Project Blindfold was about listening for that truth. She detailed the conspiracy, naming names and outlining the charges. It was a clinical dissection of a cancer that had plagued the city. But the real catharsis was happening away from the cameras. In the state penitentiary, men whose cases were flagged by the IBJ began to be released. Maria Flores's son walked out, squinting in the sunlight, into his mother's crushing embrace. Old Mr. Henderson was given the deed to his building back, the fraudulent sale voided by a new judge. Their freedom was the first true breath of fresh air Brighton had taken in years. Chloe Abrams, the public defender, found her office inundated with flowers and thank you cards from the community. The media, once complicit in Cole's narrative, now sought her out, hailing her as a tenacious fighter who had stood against the machine, even when she didn't know she had a federal agent at her side. She used the spotlight not for herself, but to advocate for a new, fully funded public defender's office, one with the resources to actually fight for its clients. The city council, scrambling to distance itself from the scandal, announced a full review of the Northbridge project and the creation of a new independent ethics commission. The reforms were tentative, born of panic, but they were a start. The institutional power was shifting. Noah watched it all from a temporary command center. He saw the photos of reunited families on the news, the videos of corrupt officials being led away. He felt a quiet, deep satisfaction, but it was tempered by the memory of the orange scrubs, the cold cuffs, the despair in the holding cell. He had felt the system's weight, and he knew the bruises would remain, on him and on the city, for a long time. He sought out Chloe before he left. She was in her office, now more organized, a new fire in her eyes. "You gave them their hope back," Noah said from her doorway. She looked up and smiled. "You gave them their truth. I just finally had the tools to build with it." She paused. "What you did, the sacrifice, I've never seen anything like it." "It was necessary," he replied simply. The kingdom of corruption had fallen. In its place was not yet a utopia, but a city beginning the painful, hopeful work of healing. The gavel's fury had been silenced, and in the quiet that remained, the true, slow, steady work of justice could finally begin. A year later, the sound in courtroom 4B was not a gavel's crack, but the soft, deliberate click of a nameplate being mounted on the dark wood. The workers stepped back, revealing the polished brass letters. On Elena Torres. It was a quiet ceremony, witnessed only by a few court staff and a single, watchful reporter. The plaque for Judge Raymond Cole had been removed, its ghost faintly visible in the cleaner wood around it, a permanent scar and a permanent reminder. Judge Torres, a former civil rights attorney with a reputation for meticulous fairness, ran her courtroom with a calm, inclusive authority. There were no sermons, no performances. Her first official act had been to review every expedited case from Cole's Northbridge docket. Dozens of convictions had already been overturned, lives slowly, painstakingly, being stitched back together. The kingdom had not just fallen, it had been rebuilt on a new foundation. The foundation of the old kingdom was now a 6 by 8 foot cell. Raymond Cole, inmate number 73482, no longer wore black silk, but a standard issue orange jumpsuit identical to the one he had forced upon countless others. The deference was gone, replaced by the casual brutality of prison hierarchy. The man who had played God was now a pawn, stripped of his name, his title, and every last shred of the dignity he had so carelessly stripped from others. His world had shrunk to the four walls of a cage, a poetically just echo of his own most famous pronouncement. For Noah Carter, the return to Washington, D.C., was a return to a life that no longer fit. The crisp suits of the IBJ felt like a costume after the gritty reality of the Crestview apartments. The sterile war rooms, with their glowing screens and quiet analyses, felt distant from the raw human cost of injustice he had lived and breathed. He had carried the weight of Darius King back with him. The memory of the system's crush, the faces of those he'd been imprisoned with, the weary hope in Chloe Abrams's eyes. It all demanded more than just a return to normalcy. So, he built a new normal. Using his credibility from the blindfold operation, he founded the Justice Integrity Initiative. Its mission was simple, yet monumental: to train and fund a new generation of undercover agents and prosecutors, specifically to target systemic corruption within the justice system itself. It was a legacy born from a mattress that stank of mold and survival, a direct challenge to the machines that created such places. The work was demanding, but it was his. He was no longer just dismantling from the outside. He was planting seeds of integrity from within. Months into his new role, a court case in a neighboring state required his testimony. The trip brought him back to Brighton. The city felt different. The billboards of progress no longer seemed like lies, but like promises the city was actually trying to keep. The air felt lighter. On his last evening there, he found himself walking the familiar steps of the courthouse. It was after hours, the grand halls empty and silent. A lone custodian, recognizing him with a respectful nod, allowed him entry. He pushed open the heavy door to courtroom 4B. The room was bathed in the soft, amber light of the setting sun filtering through the tall windows. It was utterly still. The judge's bench, where Cole had once held court like a malevolent king, was just a piece of furniture. The witness stand, where Leo had told his coerced lie, was just a chair. The air, once thick with perfumed sweat and terror, was now clean. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps the only sound. He didn't go to the defense table. He stopped in the center of the room, on the exact spot where he had stood as Darius King, shackled and condemned. He looked up at the empty bench, at the new plaque he couldn't read from this distance, but knew was there. From a hidden speaker in the ceiling, a soft, melancholic piano piece drifted, the maintenance crew's end-of-day ritual. The notes filled the silence, not with tension, but with a sense of peace. In this quiet, hollowed space, where so much had been broken and was now beginning to heal, the final, clear thought settled in his mind, not as a whisper, but as a truth he had purchased with his own freedom. In the end, power isn't in a robe, or a gavel, or a title. Power is in truth, and the courage to stand in it, no matter the cost. He took a deep breath, turned, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the soft piano notes to echo in the silence. A gentle, hopeful sound, where once there had only been the thunder of a falling gavel.